Hi my fetishes! Today we take a look on a rare dual CPU motherboard. It has great overclocking capabilities and in combination with the right CPUs it has a great performance too. It's an evga classified sr2 with two x5650. In my opinion, a better name for this motherboard is Unicorn. First we talk about the components of this very interesting system. Afterwards we are going into the building. I assembled a lot of PCs and servers over the last 20 to 25 years, but while building this system I acted like a complete noob and made horrible mistakes. It was painful. The god of IT will punish me for that. I will rot in the IT hell, I am sure. After trying my ideas, we overclocked this beauty and let it show in gaming benchmarks what it can do. And at the end we make a short wrap up of this topic. As you can see, the board is fairly huge. The proprietary form factor is HBTX from evga. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this motherboard seems to be the only HBTX board in the world. If not, let me know in the comments which motherboards are HBTX too. I don't have a case for this board, but I think I won't get one because just look at it. Let's take a look at the motherboard for a while. It's a dual socket 1366 board, obviously, with 12 DDR3 RAM slots. Due to the outstanding overclocking capabilities, it needs two additional 6-pin PCI Express power connectors for the CPUs, which are placed near the CPU sockets. It has 7 PCI Express 16 connectors and is capable of up to quad SLI, respectively quad crossfire. You find 6 SATA 2, 2 SATA 3 and 2 eSATA connectors, as well as 10 USB 2 and 2 USB 3 connectors. Dual gigabit Ethernet and of course onboard sound are in too. I suppose some of you know this board and you also know that this board is hard to get. The price at the release was about 600 USD. This was in 2010. I bought it in the first half of 2017 and I paid about 550 USD. This price is insane, but if you're insane too, it's okay. It took me about 2 months to find one with a reasonably price. The board was already populated with two x5650. These are low power quad core Xeons. Maybe I will do some tests in the future with them. The overclocking capability is awesome. You can overclock two Xeons relatively easy. Despite the age of the architecture of nearly 8 years, it has a lot of power for daily workloads. Of course, there are some dual Xeon boards out there which have overclocking capabilities too, but it's limited to marginal changes of the base clock. Maybe you can increase it from 100 to 105 MHz. For example, some 2011-0 and 2011-3 Asus boards with the WS suffix can do this. But with the SR2 you can go up to 200 MHz and beyond, if you are lucky. I swapped the two L5520 with my two X5650. They are hexa-core Westmaster CPUs with 12MB level 2 cache, RAM speed support up to 1333 MHz, produced in 32nm and have a DDP of 95W each. They have a stock speed of 2.66 GHz with a 3.06 GHz turbo. Let's see what they can do when we overclock them. My hope is 4 GHz. I'm using Crucial Ballistics Sport DDR3 1600 RAM. They have standard timings of 9, 9, 9, 24. In total the system will have 24GB RAM, so I can use triple channel on each CPU. As mentioned before, the CPU supports just 1333 MHz RAM. So when we are overclocking the system via the base clock, we have a buffer regarding the RAM speed. For the boot drive I'm using a Samsung 850 EVO with 250GB and for games the 500GB version of it. They are both SATA 3. An Asus ROG Strix 1080 Ti OC edition from a main rig will be responsible for the picture. The stock settings are 1987 MHz boost on the GPU and 5.5 GHz on the VRAM. There is no overclocking active besides the one from Asus. To be loyal to the brand, I'm using an evga 850W 80+ gold power supply. To put it simple, it has a lot of connectors. Now let's come to the CPU coolers. How should I say this? I botched. Completely. I can't believe my stupidity. But let's start at the beginning of the tragedy. I was looking for CPU coolers that will fit on a 1366 socket. Shouldn't be a problem. Unless your brain goes into standby, like mine. My choice was the Arctic Freezer 13. I don't know why. The brochure said it is capable of 200 watt cooling. And of course everything the advertisement says is true. Yeah. With a turbo stock frequency of around 3 GHz they are doing fine. But who is running a CPU at stock speed if he can do otherwise and overclock it? Long story short, the CPU cooler couldn't do it and surrendered during the overclocking. So far, so more or less good. But the bad cooling capability was not the worst part of the Arctic Freezer 13. The mounting mechanism of the CPU cooler was some sort of plastic rectangle you have to put on the board. In each corner of this rectangle you have to push pins through it. The edges of the corner had contact with the board, but there was something in the way and I didn't understand why I can't push the entire pin through the mounting hole. I looked and searched, but I couldn't find out what was wrong. I had this problem with 3 out of 8 mounting holes of the 2 rectangles, but I managed to push every pin through it, and I was happy. I assembled the rest and started the machine. Everything worked fine. I installed Windows 10 and made some stability tests overnight. Overclocking was not a problem, despite the fact the CPU coolers were weak. As I saw the CPU coolers were crap, I switched to the SK3 Assura coolers. I disassembled the system and heard a very low noise. Something like a very small screw forced through the board. Then shit hit the fan. Again I looked and searched and found an SMD capacitor. And another one. And a third one. Needless to say, I was shocked. Then I saw the disaster. I pushed away 5 SMD capacitors in total with the Arctic Freezer. I was close to tears. I contacted evga if they can repair it. For money of course. But they refused to do it. I assume if they repair it for money, they need to give you some sort of warranty. I don't know, just speculation. But what they did, they sent me the exact identification of the broken capacitors. Thank you evga. Then I found someone who could solder them back on the board. It took him 70 minutes to solder them back on. Thank you very much, Lucas. What's the lesson we learned? Check everything twice before you go on a shopping tour and keep your eyes open when you mount something. The SK3 Assura are doing pretty well. Maybe a Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo would deliver a slightly better result. Enough self-pity. Let's get to the interesting part. The complete building without a case. To use dual channel RAM with both CPUs you need 6 RAM sticks, 3 for each CPU. You need to populate DIMM 1, 3 and 5 of each set, the red ones. To not increase the noise level of the Northbridge cooler, I recommend to put the graphics card into PCI Express slot 5. Do not cover the fan, because if you cover it, the fan will make an annoying high pitch noise. Slot 1, 3, 5 and 7 are PCI Express 16 slots, so there's no problem with the PCI Express bandwidth. Enough with the boring stuff. Next stop, overclocking. Yes, overclocking with Xeons and a dual socket board. And I don't mean some unmotivated 5% overclocking of the base clock. It has a lot of possibilities to overclock both CPUs and the RAM, but nevertheless it is hard to overclock it. First, you need 2 CPUs which are good to overclock, and second, you have the connection between the 2 CPUs which can cause trouble. What's good? These Westmere CPUs have good overclocking capabilities. It's a lot of trial and error to overclock the system. I did some research and got the CPUs to 4.33 GHz with a base clock of 197 MHz and a multiplicator of 22. At first I was surprised how easy it was. I made some CPU benchmarks and was impressed. Then I wanted to know what the system is capable of in games. I tested 3D Mark and superposition and the result was somewhat surprising. The higher the clock speed, the lower the graphic results were. The sweet spot was 188 MHz base clock. Everything above decreased the graphics performance. Still don't know why yet. I used the BIOS configurations of other sr2 overclockers on the internet, who went beyond 200 MHz. I assume 3 possibilities. First, some component get too little voltage. Second, some frequencies are running out of sync. This was sometimes an issue I encountered regarding overclocking in the 90s. And third, simple overheating of components. I need to investigate this behavior. Maybe you have some ideas. To lower the possibility of troubles, I recommend Xeon CPUs with a high multiplicator, so the base clock of the board can stay lower and increases the stability of the system. The x5650 I am using has an all-core multiplicator of 22, including its turbo boost. A x5675 has 25 and the price with about €55 each is reasonably. During benchmarking I had another strange issue. This board has a very nice feature. You can deactivate each CPU separately and don't need to take out the CPUs to make a one CPU benchmark. But when I shortcut the jumper and deactivated one of the CPUs in overclocked state, the motherboard will boast with FF. More strange is the fact the board showed FF during the Windows boot, and then it freezes. In one occasion the board showed FF and Windows ran perfectly fine. I solved this problem with cleaning the CMOS and overclocked it with only one active CPU with the same settings like in dual CPU mode. Then the board worked like a charm. Okay, now let's have a look at the overclocking BIOS settings. I recommend to clear the CMOS first and flash afterwards the BIOS to the newest version, if necessary. Then you can start with the overclocking. All we need is the menu Frequency Voltage Control and its submenus. Keep in mind, we are overclocking the base clock of the board. We overclock a lot of different systems on the board and not only the CPU. That's why we need to lower some settings to bring back stability. Here's my BIOS configuration. Maybe you can use it. So the overclock speed is 4.13 GHz on all cores with a multiplicator of 22 and a base clock of 188 MHz. Let's accept this. The system is up and running and it's benchmark time. The benchmarks were performed with 4 different configurations. Stock speed with 1 and 2 CPUs and overclocked with 1 and 2 CPUs. 2 graphic settings were used, one in 720p with lowest settings and 1440p with max settings. So it should be possible to distinguish the CPU and GPU bottlenecks. Enjoy! What was surprising for me was the relatively high performance of one CPU at stock speed of 2.66 GHz and with a dual core duo of 3.06 GHz. It's close behind the other configurations. Very impressive. Every game loves clock speed. You can see it clearly in 720p with lowest settings. An additional CPU doesn't make a real difference. Some games recognize the second CPU and ignore it if there are enough threads available on one CPU. Only Doom and Wolfenstein 2 take all threads of both CPUs. In the worst case, with a second CPU, you could lose here and there a frame, but it is unrecognizable. Depending on your playing resolution, your graphics cards will be the bottleneck, especially if you are going beyond 1080p. The higher the resolution, the more the benchmark results are getting closer to each other, because the GPU is bottlenecking. So, what's the final conclusion of this board? Should you buy it? Does it have enough power to justify the price? To be honest, No, don't buy this board. It's fun to experiment with this system, and despite the age, also the performance for daily workloads are impressive. But it's not a good bang for the buck. Nevertheless, I have some experiments for this board in mind, and I will make some videos about it. So what do you think? Is it still this impressive like at the release in 2010? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss upcoming videos. I will see you in the next one. Have a good day.